At the end of the process of going through the whole album, we mixed everything and we presented it to Chrysalis in Los Angeles, and I was still in Hollywood at the time. And of course we got that dread reaction from the record company who came back and said, well, we still don't hear a single. You better go off and write another song. Well, for a start, I'm not the sort of person that can do that on the fly anyway. So it was a real pressure cooker. Keith Forsey, his origin was that he was, for 10 years, he was Giorgio Moroder, the very famous disco producer's drummer. In fact, he played on all those Donna Summer hits and so on. And at the time, Keith Forsey was actually babysitting Giorgio Moroder's mansion up in the Bel Air Hills. And it was a proper Hollywood mansion, complete with sunken floor and white grand piano and that whole thing. But as well as that, it actually had inside the house a full 24-track recording studio. And I only was using the instruments that were in the Giorgio Moroder studio. So he had a Wurlitzer electric piano. He had a bass guitar with 3 strings instead of 4. And he had a guitar which had 5 strings instead of 6. And I recorded all these things using all these broken instruments in a very poor way because Keith Forsey was barely getting stuff on tape. And then, of course, I had about 7 verses and choruses to deal with. So I wrote these endless verses and endless choruses. And eventually, with another engineer, I recorded a vocal on it. And eventually, when we got all this thing edited together in the map that I'd made of how the verses should go and which lines should be where, I remember very clearly David Jerden turning to me and going, well, hey, man, there's their single. And this was a great moment for me. I thought, well, finally. So we took it back to Chrysalis America and they went, no, sorry. And in fact, Chrysalis in the UK had exactly the same reaction. We decided in Australia it would be a single, but we had control of that situation. There was one fellow in London who worked for Chrysalis, and he was head of what was called International, and that basically meant Europe. And that was his baby, and he could do whatever he wanted, and he could make decisions independent of whatever the UK company wanted to do. He, on his own, decided to champion Hey Little Girl, and they released it in Europe. And, of course, it became a hit in Europe, and eventually then, of course, it forced the UK company to release it, and it became a hit in England as well. But if it hadn't been for that one person, I'll never forget his name, is Mike Watts, and if it hadn't been for him, Hey Little Girl would have had no international career whatsoever.